Adobe just dropped their third quarter earnings report, including $1.44 billion in operating cash flows. We've seen the stock price grow dramatically in the recent months. Is there still time for us to get in on the stock? In today's review, we're going to take a quick look at it. Adobe is a super widely known company when it comes to content creation. Most likely, if you've ever used a computer, if you've ever had to create something, if you've ever worked in video production, video editing, photo editing or manipulation, or content creation, things like that, you've probably used something from Adobe. Little did I know before I looked into this stock in detail today that they also have a bunch of other segments that they operate out of. And Adobe has grown to be a $238 billion market cap company, with their stock price hovering kind of around like just under 500 bucks. They tipped over 500 at one point, I think 520, 530, and now they've settled back down around 475. Take a look at the 1-year stock price chart here real quick. You can see like really big growth, recently topping at their all-time high before dropping off once again. Before we look at some of the analysis, I'm gonna break down who Adobe is, what they do, for those of you who don't know, who are thinking about investing in it, or just learning about the company for the first time. Generally speaking, they operate in 3 segments. These segments are digital media, digital experience, and publishing. Digital media is the one you probably think of when you hear Adobe's name. You know, we have Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, Lightroom, and like this huge suite of programs that seems to be growing daily, all kind of connected under the umbrella of Creative Cloud. I've been a long-time user of many of these products from Adobe. I also do photography and videography and things like that. Lightroom is like one of my favorite software. I'm not super into Photoshop, but Photoshop has kind of been, you know, one of those things I kind of have to use here and there for most of my life since high school, really. And also people in our company for media production and creative stuff use Illustrator and all these kinds of products. These are the products that make up the bread and butter of Adobe's portfolio and therefore their revenues as well. Ever since products like Photoshop and Illustrator were created, basically creating an entire new industry and these powerful tools for anybody at home with a laptop to start, you know, creating logos or creating flyers or creating different kinds of creative content for companies or for, you know, restaurants or things like that. Adobe has become almost a household name when it comes to any type of content creation, basically seating them in the position of like the gold standard, you know, and this created a whole new market. A whole new market segment. And now we're seeing all kinds of competitors coming in to try and take over or to try and provide competition for the likes of, you know, just Photoshop or just Premiere or just Lightroom, let alone looking at mobile apps. There's like thousands of camera-like, photo editing-like apps that are similar to things like Lightroom. So Adobe was kind of the one who got all of this started. In recent years, Adobe, much to my chagrin, changed their business model. It used to be like, hey, you want Photoshop? 500 bucks please, or 800 bucks or something crazy like that. In recent years, they've switched that business model so that it's a subscription model. So you have to pay every month to basically be like renting the product. For me, I primarily only use Photoshop and Lightroom. I think it's 10 bucks a month to have unlimited access to those. And the nice thing about it is that they're always working on them and they're always updating them, seemingly slower than other companies that do things for much cheaper, which is frustrating. And I'll get into, you know, my own preference and my own thoughts on that whole aspect of things later on in the video. But generally speaking, one of the neat things about it is that now that it's only 10 bucks a month to get Photoshop and Lightroom, for example, there are people in third world countries that can now afford access to this thing. Whereas, you know, it would have cost like a year's worth of salary to buy Photoshop, you know, 5 years ago or 10 years ago or things like that. So this has actually provided them with access to a whole new realm of potential customers or new customers, which they can then upsell other products to. I have Photoshop and Lightroom, and I'm getting really good at them now. Maybe I'll learn Illustrator, or maybe I'll learn Premiere, or one of these other programs. And so this has actually proved to be like very profitable for them in the last few years. Taking a look at a couple of the other segments, the other 2 segments of Adobe's portfolio, we have Adobe Experience. In previous years, Adobe has acquired companies like Omniture, Magento, and Marketo, and kind of started to shift into offering other services, stepping foot into other markets. So basically, if you're good at Illustrator, you can make advertisements. And probably a lot of the advertisements, like static advertisements you see, are made in Illustrator. So Adobe's like, how can we provide more service for marketers or for companies that are trying to make commercials or advertising or things like that? So picking up these companies has allowed them to create the Adobe Experience. I'll just read off their site for you here. It says Adobe Experience Cloud is a collection of applications and services built on the first platform specifically designed for unmatched customer experiences, giving you the most comprehensive tools for insight, content, management, and more. And then on the next one, they have analytics, profiles of the customers and people who are using the products, and then also customer data platform. So basically, not only is Adobe helping you or giving you the tools to create ads, they're also giving you the tools to optimize them, to figure out what kind of customers are using them, to figure out how to customize them better to the correct target market, and things like that. Adobe Experiences is a much smaller part of their portfolio and their revenues, but I think it will be crucial for their growth in the coming years, especially as growth in the digital media segment, the one I mentioned earlier, is starting to slow down a little bit. Revenues in the last quarter in the Experience segment were up 7%, up to $838 million. Publishing, the third segment, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but basically years ago, Adobe came up with the idea of making the PDF. It started with the Adobe Acrobat software, and to be able to edit a PDF, you needed a certain software. And even back in the day, you needed a special software to open a PDF. Now most operating systems and phones are like, yeah, PDF, whatever, everybody needs that. So you can open it on our system now. You don't have to go to Adobe's system and download a new software just to look at PDFs. But Acrobat has actually grown into $1 billion business now. As digital document signing becomes a bigger thing, work from home becomes a bigger thing, being able to send documents securely in a way that makes it so they can't be tampered with or edited or things like that is one of the strong points of Adobe Acrobat and PDF format and stuff like that. So the publishing segment also reaches out into actual printing equipment and other tools that they provide for publishers. I'm not going to go into too much detail in that, but I wanted to jump in now to kind of the overall numbers and some of the information that they provided in this most recent press release after their earnings report. For their third quarter, record quarterly revenues of $3.23 billion, which is a 14% year-over-year gain. The digital media segment, that's the one with Photoshop and all that stuff, had a growth of 19% year-over-year, up to $2.34 billion, along with other segments growing as well. So the digital media segment makes up $2.3 billion of the total $3.2 billion revenues from last quarter. So that goes to show how much of a role that plays in all of their cash flow. I've talked recently in a few of the other videos about annual recurring revenues, ARR. This is like the holy grail for so many businesses. If you can get people to sign up and be paying a monthly fee, especially if it's not a huge number, there are millions of people around the world who will just sign up for something and then kind of forget, or maybe log into Netflix and watch a show a couple times a month or things like that. If you can get annual recurring revenue going or monthly recurring revenue going, then it can be really, really good for your bottom line as a business. And we've seen that in Adobe's case as well. I mentioned earlier about how they switched in the last few years from a one-time purchase business model to a monthly recurring business model. And as a user, I hated that. I much prefer to buy a software once or download a software once and then just be able to use it forever. Now it's kind of oh man, do I need to cancel that service? Oh man, I don't really use that thing anymore. I gotta figure out how to cancel it. I gotta call them up from Japan all the way to wherever, and figure out the hours and all this stuff. It's just such a hassle as a customer. But for Adobe, it's worked out to be freaking splendid. So let's take a look at some of these numbers. The digital media segment up 24% to $9.63 billion of annualized recurring revenues. The numbers I shared a minute ago were just the third quarter. So these are annually. This is how much they'll be making from each segment. The creative segment up to $8.29 billion. Document Cloud annual recurring revenue up to $1.34 billion in revenues. So when we're seeing things like digital media up 24% for ARRs, that's just wow, this is super a really, really good stock to have or a really good company to own. It's not always great for the users, like I was mentioning, but really, really good for the stock, especially with growth rates like 24%, and as I mentioned in most videos recently, as things are transitioning to work at home or telecommuting or not having to go to the office, more people are going to be having computers, more people are going to need software like this, more people are going to be needing cloud stuff, more people are going to be needing a secure way to share files and things like that. So all these businesses have really, really bright futures. Going back to some of the highlights from the third quarter report, GAAP net income was up almost $1 billion, with non-GAAP at $1.25 billion. Cash flows from operations were a record $1.44 billion. That's a beautiful number as well, and Adobe management is reasonably very proud of this number. They also mentioned that they bought back 1.5 million shares, which is good for stockholders, not always good for everybody else, but good for stockholders because that kind of puts like a constant pressure on the stock price to be creeping up. If you know there's always going to be somebody, that somebody being Adobe themselves, buying the stock, that puts a little bit of like, boop, up in that stock price, So for stockholders, that's a good thing. They also shared some of their other goals for the next quarter, basically higher bars in almost all of their categories, as well as an expected GAAP EPS of $4.29. So continuing on my thoughts for the future, one of the trends we're seeing is that the barrier to getting into the Adobe suite, to being able to be a user, is so much lower, $10 a month or $50 a month or whatever it is, depending on what you need. We're seeing a whole new world of clients using Adobe products now. This is neat on one hand because it prevents piracy. Basically, when you want to open the app, you have to log in, you have to connect to Adobe servers, and it says, okay, this is Trey McKee, and yes, he is paying us, and yes, okay, now he can use the service. That is like one of those little naggy, annoying things that sucks for the user, but is great for the company. And another thing that ends up happening a lot of times is it's like, in your mind, once you're already paying a company something, it's way easier to pay them more. For example, you go out to buy a suit, and you're like, okay, I'm already spending $300. Getting across that first hurdle of spending something, they do this with cars too, is a really big hurdle. But dealerships will say, oh, just add this, rust coating, or just add these sensors so that, you don't crash into something when you're parking, or if you're buying a suit, buy some cool cufflinks or something like that. And those end up being really, really high margin. But saying yes to those things is way easier psychologically than saying yes to the original purchase. And so if my mindset is already, I'm already paying Adobe every month anyways, or every year anyways, adding another service ends up being much easier. And that's one of the beautiful things for companies when it comes to recurring revenues and recurring expenses and things like that. So I think we're gonna be able to see even more user growth, though it is slowing down, even more user growth as well as higher margins in the creative segment going forward here into the future. Considering the moat that Adobe has, depending on who you listen to, different people have different opinions about it. One of the things to consider is that ever since they switched to this monthly payment model, a lot of people like me, who are really picky about how much they spend each month, are kind of like, I'd rather just find something else where I can just pay $100 or $300 and be done with it for the rest of my life, rather than paying thousands of dollars over the next few years. And so when we look at the company's moat overall, you kind of need to look at the different segments, but I want to primarily focus on the creative segment because that's their bread and butter. That's where they make the majority of their margins. And that's also where there's going to be more competition. For us, we do, video production, media production, all these different things. One of the things that sucks is that using Premiere has a much higher bar now. There are more really, really high quality video production programs. We use DaVinci Resolve. They have a free version, and the free version lets you do as much as Premiere does, and it's really, really good. Once you start needing advanced features, you can pay $300 once and get a license that you can use forever. And of course, they keep doing updates. And DaVinci Resolve basically started in Hollywood. It's like one of the best color correction softwares available. And you can get a free version of that now. For their business model, they hope you get into it and they hope you fall in love with DaVinci Resolve. And then you start leveling up your operations and you go out and buy one of their 6K video cameras. That's like thousands of dollars. Or one of their control panels, that's thousands of dollars. And that's how their business model works. And that's how they make money and grow. But when we look at, Adobe Premiere, yeah, there's still a lot of users, but just go onto YouTube and type Adobe Premiere versus DaVinci Resolve, and you'll see like hundreds of really big time video producing people who are like, dude, I'm done with Premiere. I'm going to Resolve. And I think we're going to start seeing more cheap or free alternatives to a lot of Adobe's creative suite coming up into the future. It's hard to say how much that's going to chip into their bottom line, like next quarter or right now, or going into the coming years. But I think that's a very real threat we need to consider when evaluating their moat and kind of their position in the market. So when we're considering this moat, we need to look at those switching costs. Companies like, if my company had 20 designers in it and I'm paying for licenses for all of them, that's a big expense. But if I'm like, hey, I found a free alternative, now we need to retrain everybody and then, buy these new licenses for this new thing, there will be a lot of frustration, there will be a lot of friction making that switch. And so that's switching costs. And because the switching costs are high to leave Adobe, a lot of companies and a lot of individuals will probably just be like, yeah, it's so annoying and such a frustration that I'd rather just pay that monthly fee. So that's the leverage Adobe has in switching their business model over to something like a monthly payment model. One of the really big kind of premium things that Adobe offers is that entire suite, and our design guy on our team has grown up basically since design school using Illustrator, and he's super duper quick at Illustrator. He's just like, boom, 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 done. Here you go, boom, and it's like really slick. It's built into him now. It's like part of his body. It's the same as walking, or running. He just makes stuff in Illustrator super quick and easy. Switching out to a whole new software, yeah, a lot of softwares offer like, same hotkeys or really similar features or whatever, but it's never really quite exactly the same as using Illustrator and then being able to really quickly sync things with Photoshop or things like that, and so that moat has been developing over the years, and they have access to that moat because they were the first ones who made Photoshop and Illustrator. And so many companies have been built on that for so many years. And so that provides quite a solid moat for them. It's not an impenetrable moat, and I think we'll see more and more competitors coming up into the market in the coming years, but it does provide a solid moat for them. When considering their experiences segment, the one that helps people evaluate marketing and do marketing better, I think one of the interesting things we're seeing right now, because the economy is slowing down, shopping is slowing down, online sales, online marketing, and the prices for marketing, even the prices that people pay to put a commercial into the YouTube videos you're watching all the time, have dropped a lot. And therefore, like if I was monetized, if I was getting $5 per 1,000 clicks on YouTube, now marketers are really only willing to pay $2 or $3 per 1,000 views. And so that's happening across the board. And what ends up happening when companies are cutting their marketing budgets, it makes it much harder for companies like Adobe, who are offering things like experience, to expand and to be proving their value. So I think when it comes to the experience segment of Adobe's suite, I think it'll be harder to see growth. And the moat is actually pretty much non-existent because they've plowed into a market that is already controlled by big players like Salesforce or Oracle or SAP or things like that. When you get really big, you need to start stepping out into other segments to continue that growth. So what do I think right now about Adobe? We're looking at prices about $470. We're seeing really good revenue growth. We're seeing like record-breaking profitability and things like that. The company doesn't have much debt to worry about. It's a really brilliant company. As far as being a stockholder goes, on the user end, there've been a lot of times where I'm just like, dude, Adobe, stop it. The one I use the most is Lightroom. Lightroom was a software on the computer that was just actually not even really that clear and straightforward to figure out. But once I got it going, now, I'll go shoot a wedding or something and I'm just like, boom, boom, boom. I can edit things just how I want to and the clients are really pleased with it, like pretty quickly and more powerfully than I can in other apps. But what they ended up doing was creating the Creative Cloud, putting it in there, and now offering some other version of Lightroom, and then offering Lightroom Mobile. And one version of Lightroom is like designed to be like the classic one, but the other version is supposed to like work well with mobile Lightroom. And everybody is just like, how do I manage these? Like, what are you even doing? Just make it like, my hard drive pictures are here and my mobile pictures are here. Like, why do you have to make freaking 3 different softwares and stuff like that? It's like, Adobe, what are you doing, you know? And you look around on the internet, look on Reddit, just type in I hate Adobe or something like that. And you'll see like thousands and thousands of people just pulling their hair out when it comes to Adobe stuff. You know, I think the company is very profitable. I think it's growing and it has a bright future. I think you need to be a little bit cautious when thinking about those really, really core, really faithful long-term clients who are just starting to give up on it. You know, people will say also, I'm paying every month, but they're not updating things. I'm still getting errors. I'm still can't really figure out how to sync this and that and stuff like that. It's like, dude, if you're paying every month for it, it better be like super prime, super perfect experience. But that's not really been the case for a lot of their really long-term loyal fans. That being said, the stock is in a really good position. I should let you know that I haven't actually owned Adobe before. Like it as a stock, I don't like it as a user, but I think the stock price is too elevated to merit the kinds of growth that we're seeing. I think one of the really tricky things with the big run up after March especially is that there are a lot of companies that are kind of in the spotlight that people are just so in love with that they stop thinking about, is this company worth this price tag? You know, right now you can go to a dealership and buy a Toyota Corolla for 25 grand or whatever it is. You know, everybody knows 25 grand, 25 grand, 25 grand. You get a good car, it's reliable, it's a great product. But all of a sudden, if millions of people around the world decide that a Corolla is now worth $50,000, if I come to you and say, hey, I got a Corolla for you for 50 grand, what happens in your mind is you think, is this worth that much? Is he offering me some kind of value proposition? And so, yes, Adobe is great. Adobe is a good business to own. Is it worth 470 bucks? I'm a little bit more cautious on that, you know. My investing style is to look for companies that are going to be growing over the long term in big percentages. I think if you bought Adobe for 470, you're probably going to see some growth going into, 5 years into the future. Might be growth from 470 up to 490 or 520 or even 600 or 700. I think for a while now, we're probably going to be seeing it bouncing around between 450 to 520-ish. I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up happening. If we see a big drop back down to kind of March levels, like low 400s or high 300s, it would be a much more appealing option for me as somebody who's looking for percentage growth. For you, if you have like boatloads of cash and you're just looking for somewhere to put it, where probably you'll see a little bit of growth or you'll outpace inflation or things like that, I think Adobe is not a bad choice for you. If you've been a long-term holder of it, it's probably a good idea to just keep holding it. I don't see any reason to sell. I don't see any, massive threats that are gonna cause it to plummet and fall off a cliff or anything like that. Please also let me know if you have stocks that you're thinking about or noodling on that you wanna learn more about or you think I should look into for my own portfolio. I'm starting to get more and more requests in the comment section, and that's always really fun for me to start, getting my antenna out and looking around at different things that I might not often be looking at or come across. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to watch the video all the way to this point. It means a lot because there are so many different YouTube channels out there. It means a lot that you would take the time to watch the entire video. So I thank you guys very much for that. Thanks for watching. I love you guys and have a great day.